I don't really believe that our church really adopts that of like, you have to be indoctrinated. Our church wants you to know and learn and be convinced. Do your homework, as I say. Is Adam and Eve a historical pair? And out of this pair, all humanity came. These ancestors, the Neanderthals, the caveman, the Homo erectus, and all those, were parallel lines of creation, not mankind as we know it in the biblical account. There's virtue ethics, which basically tells you, like, you know what, you decide what to do, not based on it's right or wrong, but based on what virtue it brings. Whether it is a virtue of charity, a virtue of courage, a virtue of goodness. When you would have a baby or not, they would always think of it as a gift of God. But contraception was the first time in humanity that mankind would look at a way to intervene with God's plans. And then they came to the point, when does life start? Does life start when a sperm and an egg becomes fertilized? Or does life start when it becomes implanted? Does life start when the pregnancy lasts for about 3 months? Because a lot of times when people now are debating the whole issue of abortion, they'll tell you, well, you know what, we don't really know when life starts. And some people go and tell us, you know what, in the Bible, we don't even know when the Bible tells us when life starts. Some people will quote and say, well, you know what, we think that life starts at 3 months. Why? Because when St. Mary visited Elizabeth, okay, and John the Baptist leapt in her womb as a sign of the first time that he was alive, had a personality, the Holy Spirit was on him, and the difference between them is about 3 months, hence it's 3 months. I think that is a bit of a stretch, to be honest with you. Because how do we know that it's not even before that? How do we not even know that is at the time of fertilization? And then the question becomes, and this is the point, philosophically, is the potential of life the same as life? If that fertilized egg that is frozen in the fridge, you would say, well, this is not alive. But you know what? If you plant it in a womb, it will become alive and it will become a person. Legally, it is, well, not legally, I'll take that back, okay? Biologically, it is alive. But then the question becomes, where's the fine line? You all know from your biology that this is the stages of fertilization all the way until implantation. And yes, you would look at contraception in many ways that, you know what, if you prevent it even from being fertilized to the point that you prevent it from being implanted. Well, if you are, let's say, within the Catholic Church camp, and you would consider that life means it happens at the time of the fertilization of the egg, then you would see that, for example, that something like an IUD would be killing. Because the IUD, part of what the IUD does, part of it, not all of it, that it prevents the implantation at day 7 and 8. I find it very interesting that you find a lot of medical societies over here, like the American College of Obstetrics and Gynecology, trying to combat against the Catholic Church. And it would say, by the way, IUDs prevent the fertilization of the egg. That is true in many cases. But it's also true that IUDs do prevent the implantation of the fertilized egg at day 8 in the uterus. And if you lose it, that would be considered that an abortion from the Catholic Church perspective. And I think that's one of the reasons why, and sometimes a lot of us kind of really, you know, especially in this country, cannot make sense. How come the Catholic Church does not allow contraception? And you know why? First of all, because they think that a baby is a gift of God and we should not be interfering with that. Number two, because they would tell you, we cannot, with the best of our scientific knowledge and our theological understanding, define when life starts. If you believe that life starts from day 1 of the fertilized egg, then any kind of contraception after that would be problematic, because you've lost that. If we take the idea, well, is life equal personhood? They would come and tell you something very interesting. It's kind of been documented that almost up to about 2 weeks, the fertilized egg that becomes this blastocyte, up to almost about 2 weeks, can split into 2 and become a twin. And those will become 2 different persons, right? Hence, prior to that, it's hard to tell that that is a person, although for most part, it would continue on as a one-person pregnancy. But up to about 2 weeks, it can become two. So if prior to 2 weeks, if there's a potential for it to split, is that considered a person? Is that considered life? So then you find some Christian bioethicists would say anything prior to 2 weeks is okay. The problem, as I said, it's a very, very fine line. And how do we define life? Definitely from an evolutionary standpoint, if we are all in control and we all brought it up at that point, like, you know what, even up to about 20-something weeks, okay, abortion can be okay, if we're just from an evolutionary standpoint. However, if we look at life as a gift of God, you almost track it back. Another problem, technology-assisted reproduction. This, I think, is one of the toughest things for a Christian church to handle. You know why? Because we love to have children. We think of children as a gift of God. We always think about Sarah. We always think about the Old Testament. We always think about God's words about blessing. But then when you look at how we are manufacturing babies. In fact, there is a very interesting book that I would recommend for anyone who's looking into this. It's called Made, Not Begotten. Because now in our world of medicine, we're making babies. We're not begetting babies. And you would say, well, you know what, something like artificial insemination, well, there's no problem because you got a sperm and you put it in the mom and that is all okay. But then in vitro fertilization becomes really tough. And trust me when I tell you, I really have a lot of hard time with this because I tend to be very, very also sympathetic. I'm a child of 3 kids. If I didn't have kids, I would have struggled with this. Would anyone tell me, it's like, you know what, you would do everything you can do to have a baby? Absolutely. Do I know a lot of Coptic couples and Christian couples that have gone for IVF? Absolutely. Do I know of priests who've recommended IVF? Absolutely. But I think we have to step back and think about the biological evolution of this. And is this acceptable for us as Christians? Because it comes back to the point of sanctity of life and glory of life, and when and how are we even able to define it? When you look at the process of IVF, what happens in IVF? Well, you take an egg and you fertilize it with a sperm, and then you put it in a petri dish for a couple of days, and then you implant this in the woman's embryo. All up to this is good and nice and dandy. There's no problem. And then in a couple of weeks, you have what's called the blastocyte, actually a couple of days. But then the story doesn't stop here. And I think this is where a lot of us don't know the details of IVF. It is well known because of the economics of the process. Because you know what? An average IVF in this country costs about $20,000. $25,000. So it's economically, it's a lot of burden. And insurance doesn't pay for it, and you know, they don't get any help. Different than adoption. By the way, a lot of companies would help a family if they're trying to adopt, but IVF they would not. So $20,000, and the best success rate for a process like this is about 20 to 25%. So to enhance the economics of this, because you're paying a ton of money out of your pocket, what do? So they give the mother a lot of hormones to produce as many eggs as possible. Because it's a one-time deal. You're going to pay $20,000, we better make sure that it is going to happen. So the mom produces 8 to 10 eggs, and then they take all those eggs and they fertilize them. All of them. So all of them are potentially alive. And then they take, out of those maybe 10 eggs, they take 6 and they implant the 6 in the mom. Why? Because they want to enhance the potential possibility that they will live. Because if you implant them one at a time, each one at a time is a procedure in of itself. So they say if we're going to implant them, we might as well implant 6. And then they let them grow. They get some time. But then you know what happens? And in about a couple of weeks, you might find that out of those 6 that are implanted, all of them are growing. And then you know what they're faced to do at this point? It is called selective reduction. What is selective reduction? It is going and injecting potassium. It is killing almost all of the babies minus 1 to keep 1 alive. And they scientifically justify it that basically if you would leave the 6, well, all of them are jeopardy because multiple pregnancies jeopardize the lives of them. So to enhance the chance of 1, let's kill the other 5. So it's injecting potassium, it's injecting a drug that kills the rest of the babies. And by the way, some IVF practices would make the parents sign telling them, you know what, if you want this to happen, you want this to succeed, you have to accept selective reduction. You don't have a choice. So you end up killing, so here from about 4 babies, you go down to 2 babies. And you have an unwanted child. And the reality of this is that if you want to go on with this, you'll get the 6 babies and the 8 babies, but this is a major problem. So have we killed life there? So in order for us to have this baby that we're all dying to get, we kill 5 in front of it. Is that justifiable? Is that okay? And trust me when I'm telling you, I'm not in the position of a couple who've been trying to have a baby for so long, because I know it's a blessing from the Lord. But is it ethically justifiable? From an evolutionary standpoint, from a survival of the fittest, yeah, hey, what's the big deal with that? At least at the end we got our baby. What do you want? But did you kill 4 or 5 in front of it? I find it very interesting when I was reading about this topic. In Italy, which is a heavily Catholic church, a heavily Catholic nation, one of the things that they do there, because they're struggling as a nation that is heavily influenced by the Catholic Church, but also there's a lot of secular people that want to have this. So they agreed with IVF. They agree with contraception, although the church definitely is against it, the Catholic Church is. But here's at least what the Catholic Church has mandated, and I find this very, very interesting. They said if you're going to do IVF, you can do it, but you do it under 2 conditions. Number 1, you will implant all the fertilized eggs. Number 2, you're not allowed to do a selective reduction. And I find it very interesting. Why? Because they say, you know what, hey, you want to use technology to have a baby? That's okay. But you cannot kill to do that. Hence, it is not economical. Hence, it is definitely more invasive on the mom, because you know what, you're going to have to, if you want to take your chances, you may put 1 at a time, 2 at a time, and take your chances. Emotionally, it's a roller coaster, because you know what, you implant one, it doesn't work, then you go and implant another one, it doesn't work. It is definitely very taxing on the mom. But at least what the Catholic Church there mandated is that if you want to use technology, do not kill in front of it. So I find it very, very interesting. In our rush to have babies, trust me when I tell you, and I've had a couple of friends who went through IVF, I do not believe they were aware of all the nuances of the process before they signed up. I don't think they were aware that they will have to do selective reduction of the babies. I think they were blinded at that time by an absolute desire to have the baby, that they said, you know what, okay, we'll deal with it when we get to that. Okay? And some of them said, well, we don't even know if any of these embryos are gonna live. But then the flip side of this, which is what I call the unwanted child, because out of this, you've got a fertilized egg or a baby, and then in these cases of these fertilized embryos, so now we're a couple who want a baby, and then we go to an IVF clinic, and they give the mom hormone therapy, and the mom has about 10 to 12 eggs produced, and they fertilize all of them, and then they implant 6 in the mom's womb, and then after a couple of months, out of those 6, 5 are surviving, so they kill 4 of them, and she has 1 baby, and she's very happy. And then after that, she's done. She says, you know what, hey, I'm getting old. I don't want to have any more babies. Which is, by the way, this, I find it very interesting. I've been reading some very interesting talks about, is our society, because of our drive for success and our drive for money and our drive for career, causing us to be so dependent on technology to have babies? Because definitely as the couple age, as their need for technology, assisted reproduction increases. And are we really almost like shooting ourselves in the foot? And we're playing God. It's like, you know what? Hey, now having a baby is not a gift from God. Having a baby is on my timeline. That's a big difference in understanding the gift of life. So then, after I'm done with this, I was like, I don't want to have another baby. Okay, so ma'am, what would you like us to do with our other 6 embryos that are fertilized? I'm not sure yet. Well, we have an option. We can store it in our fridge for a cost of $5,000 per year. What? $5,000 per year? He's like, yes. Okay, just keep them on for 1 year. Maybe we'll think about it. I just had the baby, so I'm really tired. I'm not sleeping. Well, maybe in a couple of years, I'll come back. After a couple of years, she comes back. Ma'am, would you like to pay the $5,000 rent for keeping your babies in the fridge? Not really. Okay, well, you can sign this paper, just give them over to us. Now they belong to us. And now they belong to this clinic. And now you get the unwanted child, which is called the stem cell research and this embryonic stem cell. It's kind of, do you guys realize something? This is like one thing after the other. So you go from contraception, you go from there to technology-assisted reproduction, you go from there to IVF, you go from IVF to what? To stem cell. Do you guys realize that embryonic stem cells would have not even been there if we would have not had IVF? Isn't that interesting how now we are playing God in this society? So in embryonic stem cell, there's no question, in an embryonic stem cell, you've got, the fertilized cell, and then you've got the totipotent cells, and then the pluripotent, which can multiply in different lines. And then once they are differentiated, definitely they become unipotent. And there's no question that they have a chance. There's been a lot of debate, and I'm not going to spend time talking about stem cell research. Okay? But there's no question that those cells are very, very potent and have a chance to cure a lot of diseases. There's no question that a lot of people are trying now on somatic cells to do that. Are they there? No. But here is the unwanted child. And you look at this from the ethical standpoint. You remember the schools of ethics that I told you? The first one is like you do good for what is good, what's called the deontological. Okay? Well, the one is going to tell you do good for what is good. This is a life, and you cannot get rid of a life. Definitely somebody who's against this will come and tells you, well, you know what, I disagree. This is not a life. This is just a bunch of cells. This is a person. No, it's not a person. Actually, it can still split into two different people. Okay? So the definition of life and personhood is a big problem there. But then a guy who looks at, the end justifies the means is going to tell you, for God's sake, you don't want to cure all the people that have diabetes, that have stems, that have brain cord injury, spinal cord injury. You don't want to cure all those? Do you realize that with these bunch of these cells who are just being frozen for many years, we can potentially cure all these diseases? Not to say that the science will need to be done, because that's something that a lot of naysayers would say, well, the science has not proven. Well, yeah, it's not proven because we've not given them a chance. They can't use the cells, the embryonic stem cells. But at least the potentiality of the science to go forward is there. And this is one of the biggest debates right now in this country. I remember when I was doing my master's and my fellowship at University of Minnesota at the time of the second Bush election, 2004. And that 2004 election, you know that every election there is a political hot topic that comes up. 2004 was stem cell. And the University of Minnesota is one of the top places in the world in stem cell. And that debate was just ongoing like no other. And it came down to the point, as a Christian, your ethics. Is it you do what is good because what is good needs to be done, and you define life and personhood at that point? Or you do it because the end justifies the means? Until this day, it's been almost 11 years, the debate has not ended, and it's going to get worse. Can I borrow you? Can I borrow you? Also, when we talk about relationships, the Bible tells us a lot about relationships. I actually do find it very interesting when you look at different faiths and different traditions, why some faiths have certain ideas. For example, we all know, for example, within Islam, they do not allow adoption, okay? But in Christianity, we do. But then you almost kind of like, well, you know what, how come these guys don't allow it? Well, they actually do have very valid reasons. And they have very valid reasons talking about the family and talking about ties and talking about obligation and talking about responsibility, talking about family line. They actually do have a reason for that. They do allow definitely in terms of that you would, sponsor a child, but you cannot cut that family tie. You cannot actually bring him from his own family, even though he doesn't have one, okay? And take him over to yours and give him your name. But then, say on us as a Christian faith, we do allow it, but then here's how we got into the mess. So right now, we're a couple, we don't have an ability, we've tried so much to have a child, and we've done all the tests, and we found out, for example, you know what, I can't, my sperms are really unhealthy, so, we still want to have a child. My wife is really okay, she has no problem, her ovaries are okay, her womb is okay. So, well, why can't I get a sperm donation? Okay? And we'll take the sperm and we'll have it, and then, okay, this child is going to be our child. But then I don't have a problem, my wife does, and she's got problems with her wombs and her fallopian tube. But then we can get her egg, okay, and then I can put my sperm, and then we can borrow a mother, okay, for money, a surrogate mother. And then even another problem, I don't have any sperms, and then my wife doesn't have any eggs. We have no chance to get a child. But then I can borrow sperms from somebody, I can borrow an ovary from a third person, and I can borrow a uterus from another person. And if you Google clinics in India, there is a flourishing industry in India for couples as such. But look at the baby that will be born. This baby has 5 parents. He's got the mom and dad who are paying the money to have him. He's got the sperm donor, he's got the ovary donor, and he's got the womb of a third woman. Whose baby is this? And at the end, since I paid the money, I own you. In one of the most interesting legal debates that have happened about maybe 10 to 15, actually no, longer than that. In the very beginning of IVF and how it came, a very rich couple from the United States wanted to have a baby, and it was not legal yet in the United States, so they went overseas to another country that allowed IVF. And they got the eggs done, and they got the eggs fertilized, and they were to come back again, okay, for the implantation. But they started the process, and the eggs were taken, and the sperms were taken, and they were fertilized, and now frozen, waiting for them to come back, okay, for the implantation. On the way back on their private jet, they had an accident, and both of them died. And this was a very, very wealthy family that was worth millions and millions of dollars. And it was kind of very interesting at this point, okay, that right at that time, the number of surrogate mothers that volunteered to have those babies because we want to give these babies a chance to live. Seriously? Seriously? And then at that time, and probably I'm sure you can know this because of like courts, so a lower court said okay to implant, those in one of the moms. And then another court overruled, okay? And at the end of this legal battle, and all of it's definitely revolving around the babies, right? At the end, a higher court ordered the destruction of those embryos because they said, you know what? We don't know who's the mom and dad. They're dead already. But it's such an interesting evolution in life and in the way that we think of life and who owns it to this point. Somebody asked me yesterday, is it okay, and you asked the question about evolution of mankind, and is it okay to improve our genes? I find this very interesting, because when we are alive, we do a lot of things to improve ourselves. We all take vitamins, we all take medications, take statins, take blood pressure medications. And there is a lot of interesting research about genes that when people have a genetic disease, they can modify that gene to improve their outcome. But that happens when we're alive. Is it okay at this point, since now we have got an ability to do an IVF, we've got an ability to do a surrogate mother, and if I am paying $30,000 to have a baby, okay? And I go to a clinic and they're giving me the sperm donors and they're telling me the characteristics of this sperm donor, and I pick and choose, click, I like the sperm donor, he is really good looking, he's very intelligent, and is a great genetic specimen. And I look at the moms and the ovaries and I click and I want this. And then I go to the clinic and I put them together and I say, hey, can you screen for any problems in the baby? And by the way, do you guys have any genes that can make him smarter? Why not? So if you do it right now for us when we're alive, what's against doing it in a baby? What's against stopping us? One of the most interesting analogies that I was given to this is that in our rush to be superhuman, we are very readily willing to jump on the train, but we don't know where to get off. We are very willing to jump on the train of technology, but we just don't know when to get off, when we say enough. So then should we screen? When you read this from Joseph Goebbels, the Nazi minister of propaganda, look at this. So this is what started the genocide. Look at what he's saying, and I would urge you to compare with what we're doing right now. Our starting point is not the individual, and we should not subscribe to the view that one should feed the hungry, give drink to the thirsty, or clothe the naked. Our objectives are entirely different. We must have healthy people in order to prevail in the world. That was what started the Nazi problem. Only healthy seed must be sown. So, I'm going to challenge all of you right now. Should we screen? Well, when you're doing in vitro fertilization and they're doing it in the petri dish, they can do it in the petri dish before they implant it to you. Now, it's norm for all babies and for all families, when they have a baby, to have testing. And if the testing is abnormal, they would have what's called an amniocentesis to find out if the baby has anything abnormal at a time when the baby can be aborted. The Catholic Church says absolutely no way, and it advises against. I've heard mixed reports from our church in this regards. Having myself gone through this in one of my 3 children, I can tell you it's unbelievably nerve-wracking that week until the tests come back. And I was not prepared to deal with the answer if it told me there was something wrong at that point. But then the question becomes, if you know that it's abnormal, what are your options as a Christian? Well, the both sides of the story, one side would tell us, like, you know what, well, we don't want the child to suffer. They're going to come and be suffering. But who said that suffering is not part of our lives? Who said that Christ came, Christ did not stop suffering? In fact, Christ came so we may suffer together. So who am I to say that this child should not suffer? I'm not God. Somebody would say, well, we cannot deal with that because that suffering is too much. And on the other side, somebody would say, well, this is a life. We cannot abort it. And I can really understand at this time some calls from Christian bioethicists for Christian moms not to even screen. I think that is very hard. I think it's very hard because there are still some genetic problems that can be corrected, okay, in utero. They're very expensive and really problematic, but they can be corrected. But the majority of them cannot. So one of the biggest debates about genetics right now, which I think from a biological standpoint is so fascinating, we have an incredible ability to diagnose. We have nothing, close to nothing, to treat. And what do you do then? Our only solution for these cases is get rid of life. Hence, should we be screening? And I think this is a very, very hard topic for a family. It's very easy when you're not the mother or the parents of the child to say, I don't think you should screen. But I've heard some amazing stories from couples who knew that their children were affected, and they kept the child. And they came back to the fundamental concept of Christianity, that Christian love, in its basic meaning, tells the person in front of it, it is good that you're here. I am blessed that you're here. It's good to see you. That is the fundamental of Christian love. When you take that perspective from an embryo that is defective, you're telling that embryo at that time, it is not good that you're here. I don't want to deal with this. And there have been some interesting Christian bioethicists who have questioned screening and questioned abortion based on screening. I think it's a very tough topic, and I think our church, as technology gets more and more advanced, we're going to face this over and over and over again. I think our church has an excellent stance on many different things, but there are 2 that are a little bit vague. I think IVF is one of them. Number 2 is screening in pregnancy. But it comes back from the point, like I'll put it this way, you guys are sounding like, well, this is really hard, but how would you compare this with the Nazi motto that, you know what, only healthy people have to prevail in this world? Is it a mandate for a Christian family that only healthy babies have to be born? What if you have a healthy baby and then right after that they have a cancer or they have a debilitating disease? What would you do? Would you give them up? If we start on the slippery slope of aborting because just we can't see this baby, we don't know him, he's not a person, Who would not say that the end of the debate of physician-assisted suicide would not be an option for our chronically ill babies who we don't want to see them suffer? It is a horrible, slippery slope. Last thing, when do we say enough? When do we say it is enough for you? As I said in biological evolution, the two biggest debates is the beginning of life and the end of life. Beginning and end. And as a church, we are just not prepared for this debate. And it's very hard. You got to support the right to die. I support the right to needlessly suffer. Well, at least you're honest. That's who we are told by. What is the Christian perspective on suffering? I think this is the Christian perspective on suffering. Christ did not come to obliterate suffering in this world. He came to transform it. Hence, the Christian basic for suffering is not that it's going to be obliterated. We do our best to obliterate suffering, but we know that we're not God. We know it's not going to be completely taken out. But through the suffering, we transform the suffering. You look at now the biggest debate in the last year, especially what happened in Oregon, especially as the mom that had the young girl who had cancer, physician-assisted suicide versus euthanasia. A lot of people think, it's a little bit vague, but clearly at the end, people are taking their life when they want. The most common reason for loss of autonomy is decreased ability, loss of dignity, fear of inadequate control of pain, right to end of life, the autonomy, less medical bills, don't worry want to be a burden on life. What's against it? The slippery slope. As I said, and I'll say this analogy again, as individuals, as community, as a church, we have gone on the train of medical technology a long time ago. We just don't know when to get off and when to say enough is enough. And that is a very tough topic. It's a slippery slope, still is perceived as murder against religion. Definitely there are other options for end of life. And I'm not going to spend too much time on it there because for sake of time. But have we really done our best to control of pain? For comfort. Dr. Haney can definitely give you a lot more about this because he deals with this far more than I do. But I can give you so many examples of people that after a cardiac arrest and after I work on them night and day to restore their heart, and their brain is brain dead, and the agony of the family at that time by prolonging life. It is not an easy decision. At the end of those 4 lectures, I really, really tried hard to find one verse that would summarize all 4 of them. And I couldn't find anything better than this verse. Because it really takes everything that I said from day 1 until now. It is not just about how we're created. It's not just about the image and likeness of God. It's not just about the glory of God. It's not just about, having babies. It's not just about living and dying. When Christ came, he said, I came that they may have life. And the end product of us is not just mere life, but abundant life. Abundant. I think the abundance of life from our perspective as Christians is fundamentally different from abundance of life from a material standpoint. Better, bigger, more. But Christ did not come for us to merely have life and just to have a little bit. I think the message for all of us as Christians in our careers, in our life, in our studies, whether it is sciences, engineering, law, whatever you're doing, figure out the abundance of life in your own self. That abundance of life is matching the message that is given to you, your creation, your own talents, everything that is given to you, but it's an abundance. And it will take you beyond the point of death into eternity. I came that they may have life. That is Genesis 1. And that they may have it more abundantly. This is the message of Christ. Thank you for your time.